Hey guys, welcome to, well, is it the most authentic voice in true crime, or is it the most Van Gogh voice in true crime? Van Gogh, of course, was um, overlooked during his life and, uh, yeah, I think kind of ridiculed in his life. And he only kind of became fairly popular and well known much later on. So he didn't really enjoy much. He didn't get much credit while he was alive. I feel a little bit like that I'm the most Van Gogh voice in true crime. I don't really hear much credit coming my way. So don't you guys agree? The most Van Gogh voice in true crime, not the most authentic. Okay. Mel Stiller, Sokoi Cat, Wendy Swain, Karina, Sharon, Roses Are Red, SW Firefly, Deborah D, Essen Kovalinsky, Blitzkrieg, Bria, Terry, Pauline, Angel Dust, James Houghton. Good to see all of you guys here. So this isn't really going to be a very long one. What I want to address is a couple of logic failures once again. We're going to address the autopsy, but from a different former law enforcement channels perspective. So we dealt with, let's call it former law enforcement number one. They did a assessment, and if you haven't voted, make sure you do. I see that only 14% think that the first assessment is accurate. I tend to agree with that the second one was definitely better. It's quite interesting that 60% of you still seem to have no idea what to make of the autopsy. For me, it's quite clear, and I hope that clarity is going to be transferred, or I hope you're going to get a clearer sense of the autopsy. So how I'm going to start this is just with a very, very simple demonstration, right? So can you guys see this? This is a vehicle, right? And I want you to put the Kiely Rodni case completely out of your mind, right? Forget about the Kiely Rodni case and concentrate just on what I'm going to show you. So can you see here's a vehicle? Imagine that there's someone inside this vehicle, right? What I've got here is a container with water inside, right? And now, as I say, imagine that there's someone in this vehicle, right? Now I'm going to do this, right? So you can see the vehicle is in water, and you can imagine either from this moment 16 hours going by, if you like. You can imagine it 16 hours or 16 days. Now, as I say, the vehicle that went into this container, it's got someone in it. And as you can see, they haven't come out of it. And so whenever you recover the vehicle, right, so when you take the vehicle out, I think I'm going to have to do this. Sorry, there's a bit of water spilling out. Anyway, when you take the vehicle out the water, the person that was in the vehicle is still in the vehicle, and they are deceased. And so the question is, how did they die, right? And what I'm trying to say is it such a difficult question? Is it such a complicated, difficult question to solve? So I'm going to do the demonstration again, and then we'll come back to it a little bit later. So here's the demonstration. As I said, forget about the Kiely Rodni case. Forget about all the details you know. Just look at what I'm showing you. Here is a container with water in it. Here is a vehicle. And imagine that there's someone driving this vehicle. There's someone inside this vehicle, someone who is 16 years old, right? And then this happens. the vehicle goes into water and it stays in water for a protracted period. And the person inside this vehicle never comes out. And then much later on, the vehicle is retrieved. Ugh, bit of a mess. With the person still inside. And so they were inside water for a really long period of time, but also trapped in the vehicle. How do you think they died? Right? And now we're going to deal with the autopsy. Okay. Mel says, I don't think it is not complicated at all. That's not to say autopsies are perfectly simple, especially autopsies that include toxicology. That is not simple. But in another sense, what we're talking about here is quite simple. Did somebody drown or not? How do you drown? Well, you go into water and you stay in water against your will for a long period of time. Did that happen in this case? Does it look like that happened in this case, right? It's just really as simple as that. And if you say it's not drowning, well, then what's your scenario? And you don't really hear much about that. So what was, I thought, very useful about former law enforcement number 2 was that he addressed, through an expert, he addressed this idea of, well, the lungs were not as heavy as you'd imagine, and also that there didn't seem to be fluid in the lungs. And I remember going into this period, I remember to sort of repeat it over and over again. If her lungs are empty, she was murdered, or if her lungs was empty, it's foul play, or if her lungs are empty, she died before she went into the water. And then I guess the other one is, if her lungs are full of water, then she would have drowned, right? So that was sort of the narrative before anyone looked at that. So I don't want to look at injuries. I don't want to look at anything else. I just want to look at the lungs. That's not the way autopsies work. You want to look at all the evidence together. You want to look at the whole puzzle and see how it fits together. And that is what I think was done better on former Ali number 2 than in number 1. So what I actually asked during the first analysis, well, that's not working out, is it? What I asked in the first analysis was, with former law enforcement number 1, was, is the criticism valid, right? And so what you saw in the second former law enforcement analysis was that he actually contradicted what the other former law enforcement channel covered, right? In other words, you had 2 separate former law enforcement entities, both looking at the same information and both coming to a different conclusion. The one disputed drowning and the other one accepted drowning. Quite interesting, definitely quite interesting. That's really the point, is that you had 2 law enforcement channels, expert law enforcement, very experienced in law enforcement, looking at the same data and coming to different conclusions. One saying, I think there's something wrong with this autopsy report. We need a second opinion. There's all sorts of problems with it. And, you know, we're going to really kind of deal with it much later on. That was sort of their assessment. We don't really agree with it. Maybe we can get a second opinion. And there are all sorts of problems with it. And then you had another former law enforcement person saying, actually, it does make sense. So they actually, just in terms of former law enforcement, they're actually contradicting one another. My personal opinion is that the criticism isn't valid. And what was quite interesting is when I asked you guys in a poll, I don't know if you guys remember, I asked you, do you think something like, do you think the autopsy should be criticized? And I think almost all of you said that it should be, right? So now we're going to deal with this other former law enforcement, his assertion, and also what his expert said. So hopefully that'll be quite interesting. Yeah, that's true. That's also true. Okay, so let's get going. So as I said, this is a logic test. A person drives into a body of water at night. The vehicle sinks with the person inside it. The person inside it dies inside the vehicle. How did they die? 99.9% of sane people, I think, would say being submerged underwater for an extended period would cause you to drown. And an autopsy confirming that would make sense. And so that is what happened. An autopsy did confirm that. I don't know the real number, but so instead of that, it feels like 90% of fake crime can't believe that Kiely Rodni drowned, that her cause of death must be something else. Why? I think it's because everyone told you it's suspicious. But maybe you can answer that question yourself. Why do you find it hard to believe that she drowned? My answer, but maybe you've got a different answer, is because everyone told you and everyone you heard said it's suspicious. But I've got to ask you, when do you start thinking for yourself, logically? When do you just pause and think for yourself, just for a moment, where you think independently using your own intelligence and you think rationally about what we're talking about? Let's try that one more time, right? Just think about it in your own mind, what we're talking about here. Try and break away from that group thing. Try and get out of that mass hypnosis. Just think about the following. And maybe you want to close your eyes when I say this. A person drives into a body of water at night. The vehicle sinks with the person inside it. The person inside it dies. How did they die? Well, part of the answer is that they died in water. Anyway, let's deal with the second former law enforcement channel. So first I want to give kudos to second former Ali's assessment of the autopsy. It was, I thought, a lot better than the first former Ali that we assessed. There was a snazzy PowerPoint. It was done quite methodically, and I think the reason why it deserves praise is that it outsourced the services of a smart, experienced, and intelligent medical examiner. Interestingly enough, he wanted to remain anonymous, but it shows. It shows that a smart, experienced, and intelligent person was present and dealt with this opinion. Now, once again, what I want you to do is put yourself to one side and imagine an incredibly smart person, not you, an incredibly intelligent person, a doctor, medical doctor. And what that doctor is asked to think about is, doctor, but this is not you. This is what the doctor must think about. Doctor, this is a container with water in it. This is a vehicle, and it's got a person inside it. Now, what happens is the vehicle goes into the container, and for an extended period, the vehicle stays in the water, under the water, and the person is trapped inside that vehicle. And a long time later, really, really long time later, the vehicle is recovered with that person still trapped inside. Doctor, in your expert opinion, what do you think happened here? Based on the autopsy, but also based on the circumstantial fabric. Doctor, in your expert opinion, what would you say happened in the situation? Yeah, it does have wavy edges. Well done for noticing that. Okay, so another reason I think the second former Ali's assessment deserves praise is that it deals with the issue of lung weight and lungs not being filled with water. with a level of expertise that I think is needed and necessary in this case. Don't you guys agree? On that particular question, you really did want someone who's a medical doctor talking with expertise, knowledge about that particular sort of niche area, right? And I've got to say it's not an area I'm terribly au fait about, which is why I haven't wanted to talk about it. When it's come up, I've said I don't really want to talk about that because I can't talk authoritatively about it because it's not my expertise. I think the difference is when you are presented with, or when one is presented with lungs that don't have water in them, I look at that and I say, I don't really know what that means. I don't know whether that necessarily means X, Y, or Z. Whereas the foul play sort of group will say, no, that's absolute evidence that it's foul play. That's good enough for me. I don't need to look at anything else. I look at that and I say, I'm not quite sure what that means either way. I need more information. I need exactly what the second former Ali provided, which is expertise on that, right? Bonnie Howell says, okay. Yeah, so someone says most YouTube creators are trying to hold on to the story for views. I hope you don't think I'm trying to do that. I'm not trying to drag this out. What I'm trying to do is address, in a way, I'm trying to hold the story accountable to itself. I'm trying to do a bit of fact checking, and I'm trying to do a kind of like, how can I put it? I'm trying to kind of hold true crime accountability to itself, although it's kicking and screaming. It sort of refuses to be held accountable. And just on that subject, let me just show you guys something. This is the Prime Minister of the UK. Liz Truss apologizes for chaos caused to Britain by a mini budget. We went too far too fast, right? And this is all about economics and so on. But there's definitely an analogy there. Someone made a mistake in a position of power and influence and authority. It caused damage. It caused problems. And then the person went in public and apologized for that, and also try to undo that damage, right? That is what leaders do, and that's what taking responsibility is, right? In a situation like that, you've caused chaos, you've gone too far, too fast, and are you going to calm the situation? Are you going to take responsibility for your part in that? Or must someone else, the Van Gogh of true crime, do that? Who's got 200 people watching right now? So you've usually got, what is it, 2,000, 5,000 people watching, but you don't want to take that step. So I must. Okay. So the reason the former Ali number 2's medical examiner said that the lungs not being filled with water, you guys know what the answer to that is. Let's ask you guys. I don't know how many of you watched that. Do you know what the reason his expert said that Kiely's lungs had no water in them, in the lungs? Do you know what the reason was? Whose blustery days is decomposition? I want a better answer than that. Dry drowning, no. STEM KB, decomposition gases can eject water. That's pretty much the answer. Terry says gases, that's pretty much that. Poos Blush Day says gases moving. So if you SW Firefly says gases from decomposition could have pushed out the water. Yeah. So if you think about it like this, you drowned, you did have water in your lungs, but now over a period of 16 days, your body starts to change. You bloat. There is a percolation and a propagation of bacteria and other things going on inside your body. And your body kind of starts to become a balloon from the inside out. Decomposition leads to certain gases forming, things like alcohol and so on. And as these gases start to percolate and bubble up, the bubbles push out water, right? So I'm sure you've all seen experiments where you have a container with water in, and if you turn it upside down and you put bubbles there, the bubbles go up to the surface, and eventually you've got an air pocket, right? Well, the lungs basically were becoming kind of an air pocket. Do you understand? In other words, if you have enough bubbling, eventually the bubbles displace the water. And that also explains how Kiely, why Kiely was found at the back, irrespective of whether she fought to get to the back. Flotation would have taken her to the back of the hatch anyway, right? In other words, if it is either a matter that she would have fought to follow the air pocket, but even if she hadn't, natural flotation, because of these gases, would have moved her in that direction anyway. Okay, so that is in any way the expert opinion of former law enforcement number 2's medical expert. So obviously this is something that has been seen before. It's something that the experts know about, right? I think what I'd be interested to ask, I think I know the answer, but what I'd be interested to ask is if they'd found Kiely the next day or 4 or 5 days later, wouldn't you have expected water in the lungs then? And I think the answer would be yes, right? And if you said, well, if there wasn't water in the lungs then, what would you say? I think they would then say, well, you couldn't blame decomposition. Then you would have a little bit of a issue to deal with, but then I think they would still revert to the circumstances. They would still say, well, you know, a vehicle went into the water with someone in it, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so those are some of the positive aspects, right? But the bottom line is gases can displace water in terms of post-mortem gases, including water in the lungs. So let me put that in chat and let me just sort of highlight that. There it is. Let's just read what Marlene says. Listening to the young lady's essay on staying quiet, not taking social media bait, was helpful in understanding the silence, but it created an information vacuum that got filled with nonsense. Yeah, that to me is something I'm very aware of. I've seen it in so many cases where there's a fear of social media, there's a sense of, I guess, revulsion. I've seen it in quite a few cases. In the very first case I covered, Oscar Pistorius, I was trying to tell Reeva's story and her parents didn't want to say anything. They didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want to really address anything. And I thought her story needs to be told. And in the end, I told it. In the end, they also wrote a book. But at the time, they really needed to, on the other hand, you can say they were grieving or they are compromised. But the problem is in that space of hurt and trauma and trying to defend yourself against all of that stuff. The false narrative arises unopposed, and who's going to oppose it? The Van Gogh of true crime. But who's going to listen to the Van Gogh of true crime? That is such a great comment, and I think it is the last word on this case. The fear of social media is not necessarily unjustified. Think about Depp versus Heard. If you were on the wrong side of that verdict, what that must have felt like. Okay, so now I'm going to deal with a few problems that I've got with former Ali's assessment, right? I've kind of given him a ringing endorsement, but there are also a few things that I disagree with. And you are welcome to say, Keepers, you're a layman, you're not a doctor. I don't think you've got the credentials to disagree. And so I want to invite you once again to put on your thinking cap, think critically, and you can follow me. You can either follow me and say, I don't really think, I don't really agree. Or you can follow and say, I see what you're saying. I don't know if I agree, but that does kind of make sense. Or you might say, well, that actually does make sense. So just see where this goes and see what you think, right? So he wrote, Emmy waits in after reading a report. It should be weighs in, just a small little gripe about that. Emmy is medical examiner, should be weighs in without the T after reading the report. You might say, stop being pedantic, but if you're dealing with an autopsy, you really got to pay attention to small little details. And we're going to see a small detail that I'm going to fuss about, right? The details in true crime, the details do matter. So let's have a look. So pretty much all the really strong analysis I thought was on one sort of slide, the slide titled Emmy weighs in after reading a report. Now I found it interesting, my personal assessment, I found it interesting that the host sort of highlighted a lot of ancillary detail, but otherwise sort of glossed through most of the autopsy without venturing much of an opinion on much of the details. That's the feeling I got. I sort of felt, wow, you're not really committing yourself here, there, or anywhere. So it didn't feel to me, as if the initial walkthrough really took you anywhere until we got to his expert's opinion. There was one point that I thought was quite interesting. About 45 minutes in, you can go there if you like. 45 minutes in, the host was asked point blank, what's your opinion? And this was his response verbatim. I'm waiting for CHP to complete the investigation. So the autopsy comes out. The autopsy says accident. The autopsy says drowning. The former law enforcement professional is asked, well, what do you think about this? And he says, well, I'm waiting for the investigation to be completed. I'm not actually going to venture my opinion, right? So if you asked me, I would say, I think the autopsy is correct. I think it is drowning. And I think it is an accident, but more important, I think it's an accident. And I can back up the accident theory. That's the other part. How did this accident happen, if that's what you think it is? I think it's important to address that. Okay, so in other words, if you asked me, I wouldn't sit on the fence. And if you asked me, I would have an answer. You could say, I don't agree with it. Well, that's fine, but I do. I'm confident in my answer. I've thought about it a lot and it makes sense. And if this was a court case, I would be ready to go to court with it, right? I wouldn't be like, well, I need some more information or I need to speak to additional experts. So this was actually brought up quite a few times, like that he's waiting for the final report, and until then you couldn't really say that. That's also something the other former Ali channel was also doing, dealing with the autopsy. So it's like, we are going to, in this episode, deal with the autopsy, only not to deal with it. Only to say, well, can we get a second opinion? Or to say, okay, well, we'll do this later. Or we'll refer to an expert. We'll look at what they say. I'm not really going to say what I think. Interestingly, although the accident theory was acknowledged, I'm talking about in the second former Ali's assessment, it was never really discussed. It was just sort of, oh, they think it's an accident. Okay, let's move on. Isn't that a little disingenuous? I'm asking a question. Isn't it a little disingenuous to say, well, we think it's foul play because of X, Y, Z, but when you are confronted with, it looks like an accident, we're not really going to think about, we're not going to dwell on that at all, right? Isn't that a little disingenuous? Cynthia, we really don't need that sort of nasty commentary. I mean, we don't need to call names, okay? We want to try and be, well-mannered and nice. There are definitely really a lot of nasties. We don't want to be part of that. So when he said, I'm waiting for CHP to complete the investigation, I read that to mean, that's just how I interpreted it. I'm going to actually stay on the fence and not venture an opinion. Or I don't know, so I can't say. I could be wrong. If I am wrong, you're welcome to address that. You're welcome to say, hey, that's what I meant. Don't put words in my mouth. I'm just saying that's how I understood it. And yeah, so maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know how you guys understood it. But when I asked the question, isn't that a little disingenuous to say, we are true crime and we investigate things and we think about things, but when it's this situation, then we don't. Then we want to wait for the report. This is why I feel it is maybe a little disingenuous. If you think about, okay, I don't want to express my opinion. I don't want to give my insight as an expert law enforcement with so many years of experience. And then you look at the other side, how AWP jumped the gun and they controlled the narrative with a suspicious narrative right from the beginning. And that's fine. And now you've got two former LEs 2 months after the fact. I mean, so much information has come out, both saying that they're not really going to pontificate on the autopsy. Yeah, you're getting some additional information. But no, now we don't really want to talk about it unless we can get a different autopsy or until we can get a different report. But I mean, they've been pontificating all along, confidently that this was foul play, basically on the unverified word of mouth evidence of one person. So when someone gives unverified word of mouth, we can pontificate and talk about that. But when we get an autopsy, that's scientific data, I don't really want to talk too much about that. Isn't that a little disingenuous? So let me just say that again. You have unverified word of mouth evidence of really one person. Let's talk about that and have lots of discussions about that. But when the autopsy report comes out, which is a scientific document, it's got measurements, it's got numbers, it's got all of that. We don't really want to, it could be an accident. Okay, well, we don't really have anything to say about that. Okay. So I also think it's important to highlight that both former LEs, right? And what I'm going to say now is going to sound quite cheeky, but this is just my honest view sitting in my chair looking at this. It was like, well, both former LEs deferred to experts on their channel, whereas did you notice I didn't? When I covered the autopsy report, I sort of covered it in my own capacity. But don't be misled by that. It's not because I'm arrogant, and it's not because I'm a know-it-all. It's not because I'm a genius. It's because I'd been examining that very thing earlier. So I did defer to experts, but I did that earlier. If you guys remember, I covered the vitreous humor, and I actually even covered the idea of polypharmacy in separate analysis that had to do with Elvis Presley's drug overdose from multiple drugs. So this channel dealt with that, with polypharmacy in our sort of Elvis investigation. It was just happened to be very sort of relevant and fortuitous and quite interesting. So that was the one aspect. But we also, I think it was September 3rd, we dealt with the drowning victims and the complexity in getting accurate data from human tissue. And I'm going to play you guys a short sample from that. So let's do the following. Hope that's going to work. Okay, so I'm going to play you guys a quick, what do you call it, a quick clip. Let's do that. And I must also, I think, do share screen, share audio. Okay, that screen. Okay, and bear with me. I mean, obviously there are those who have heard this before. Can you guys see at the top there, Kiely, Rodni, Autopsy, the Unique Challenges of Water. This comes from September 3rd. So a month and a half ago, I was dealing with this. So that's why I say when the autopsy came up, I'd already prepped, right? I'd already got a lot of the research and whatever out the way. So anyway, let's deal with this in a second. Can you guys let me know if you can hear this? I think I've got to unmute. It's going to work. Oh, it's going to play an ad, so I think I'm going to have to first play it and then get rid of the ad. So let me first do that. Let's see. Can you hear the volume when I play this? I can't. Okay, let's go back to that. Hello. Wonder why it's doing that. Is that going to work? Strange. Very strange. Well, let me try and sort it out. And meanwhile, let's unmute that. Well, let me try and sort it out. And meanwhile, let's unmute. Do that. Okay. So an ad looks like it's going to come up. I don't know why this is happening. Last time this worked. Maybe I must. There we go. Okay. So an ad's going to come up, so I'm going to try and deal with that. Let's just see how this goes. Why is this so complicated? Okay. Of ethanol rarely occurs in vitreous humor because the interior of the eye is a sterile medium. It's not influenced by the breakdown of the GI tract and migration of bacteria. Therefore, a vitreous humor ethanol concentration is regarded as a reliable indicator of the body burden of ethanol, right? But this is the part that's really interesting. Although it's very reliable, it's not as reliable as something else, urine. It says here, similarly, urine can be a useful specimen as it is usually sterile for a period of time after death. Urine does not generally contain a substrate for ethanol synthesis. That's kind of quite fancy language for saying alcohol won't spontaneously grow or develop in urine in the same way it won't do that in the eye. However, ethanol can be formed in urine if the person has a urinary tract infection. In other words, if there's originally bacteria in the urine, then that's a factor. And that then brings us to the conclusion here. The conclusion is, these cases demonstrate that in cases of prolonged immersion in water, ethanol can diffuse out of the eye, and therefore low vitreous blood ethanol ratio should not automatically be interpreted as evidence of post-mortem ethanol formation in the blood. So I'm not sure if you follow what is being said. They're saying if you found low amounts of blood of ethanol in the eye, that doesn't mean that there was a kind of a process of decomposition inside the eye. It actually means there was drinking involved. There was intoxication. Did you guys catch that? Did you guys catch that? So low blood ethanol should not automatically be interpreted as evidence of post-mortem ethanol formation. So can I ask you guys a question? Is there an issue of low blood ethanol in this autopsy, which has just come out? And is there a sense that it's being associated with post-mortem ethanol formation? Cool, right? So that is exactly what we're talking about. And it's expertise we dealt with. I think this is a peer-reviewed study, so it's also scientific. And it's something that what's the word? It predates the autopsy. In other words, it anticipated this in the autopsy. You can only do that when you really kind of know your stuff, when you know what to anticipate, right? Which I think is a little bit of a pat on the back. Since no one is going to do it for me besides my own subs, I think I'll give myself a little bit of a pat for the most Van Gogh voice in true crime, right? So we'll come back to this. What I want to deal with now is just to say, I didn't need to go and speak to experts because I'd studied up on this much earlier. This video is dated the 3rd of September. If you haven't watched it, I'll put a link in.
When it comes down to the tea.
Shush. I'll put a link in the chat so that you guys can, check it out. It's titled Kiely Rodni Autopsy, The Unique Challenges of Water. And you can't make up your own facts. And it just came out on September 3rd, which was very early in this whole thing, right? Okay. So, as I say, it wasn't because of arrogance that I didn't refer to an expert. It wasn't because of know-it-allness. It was because I've been examining cases, researching them, and researching this particular area while this case was underway. I was checking a drowning scenario specifically and how an autopsy would be challenged by that way back on 3rd of September. So if you want to go to this particular part where I deal with it, it's about 1:05:59, about 1 hour and 6 minutes. It's quite important analysis. So I had refreshed myself on issues such as blood alcohol content and polypharmacy based on other intertextual cases. These two drowning victims who were in water for 2 weeks and a month, and Elvis Presley. And then there was also, I had knowledge based on previous work in the Chris Watts case where Shanann Watts' blood alcohol was understood to be potentially high. So I'd previously dealt with that research in toxicology in that case. And I mean, I wrote 12 books on the Chris Watts case. So I did deal with that part pretty exhaustively. I wrote 9 books in the Two-Face series and 3 books in the Silver Fox series. So that's how you get quite a good knowledge when you go over an autopsy over and over again, and you look at it from many, many different views over and over again. You do become quite well educated or well versed in that sort of thing. Nevertheless, I did defer to a forensic scientist for that specific data. I basically said, I can't do this. I need help. And I contacted a forensic scientist who went and did a study. And you guys may remember that. His name was Thomas Mollett. So because of that knowledge, that's why I feel I can say I disagree with the host expert, right? I just want to make it clear what I'm saying. The host brought in an expert medical examiner, and the host provided what the bullet points were of that expert medical examiner. What I'm saying here is I actually disagree on one of those points, right? And now the question is, should you? Okay. This is where you need to really put your thinking cap on, concentrate, and try and follow with me. I'm going to kind of take it step by step. And I'm going to take you through 3 thinking parameters on which I base my case that I think there is a different interpretation compared to the medical examiner. And what I'd like to know from you guys is whether you agree. So at the end of this, I'm going to ask you, do you agree, yes or no, right? So as I said, we're going to break it down into 3 sections. And it's to do with what the host said, that the alcohol is probably all from decomposition. Do you guys have a sense of where this is going? Do you guys have a sense of what I'm going to be arguing, given what we've just looked at? The alcohol is probably all from decomposition. That is the statement from the second former Ali's medical examiner expert, right? And what I'm saying is I don't agree with that. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through my reasoning and see if you think it's sound. Imagine we're sitting in court and you, the jury, does this sound like a sound legal argument to your ears, right? So this is the first layer, the first level of my argument. I'm going to just put a 1 here. So we're arguing whether that statement, alcohol is probably all from decomposition, is it true? So now we're going to deal with the first part of the 3-part to the argument, right? So first of all, the reason why I don't think that statement is true, it's an absolute statement about something that contradicts and is at odds with the language and spirit of the autopsy itself. In other words, you've got an external medical examiner who's saying something that actually contradicts, listen to what I'm saying, the language and spirit of the autopsy itself. Specifically, I'm referring to this, which is from the autopsy. Remember I said, I'd kind of said, in that slide he wrote, medical examiner weights in, and I said, you know what, you've actually got to be careful making little errors like that. And I said, you might think that's pedantic. Well, now we're going to get really pedantic about that sort of thing. This is from the autopsy. This is the language of the autopsy in this particular area. Post-mortem toxicology for ethanol, possibly all or part from decomposition. It doesn't say probably. In other words, I'm arguing about should you use the word probably or should you not use the word probably. That's really what the argument's all about. But it is actually quite a important point. There is a vast difference in law and in science between probable and possible. The medical examiner may have felt justified in using a little license here, but I feel that he isn't justified. And one is the sense the authors of the autopsy would have said probable if they felt it was probable. Instead, they went with the more cautious possible, and then they went further to qualify that and say it could be partly due to decomposition. In other words, to say it could partly be due to decomposition, the ethanol is saying, well, it could also be partly due to something else. Do you understand what that's getting at? If you say it's only partly due to decomposition, you're saying, well, it could also be partly due to excess alcohol from the original time of death. Does that make sense? So that's not mentioned for nothing. The authors of the autopsy didn't qualify what they were saying for nothing. And so I think the host medical examiner missed that. That's my opinion. So I just want to bring up this just to show you what I'm talking about. Can you see over there, autopsy findings, point number 3 says, let me bring it up. Can you guys read that? Let's take that away. Post-mortem toxicology, positive for ethanol, possibly all or part from decomposition. That's qualifying language. The word probable isn't there, it's possible. All, so it could possibly be all due to decomposition or part from decomposition. They open to both possibilities, right? It's not really rocket science, it's the ability to read the English language, right? So that brings us to the second part of this argument. So I've already said that how can I put this? I've already said that the language of the external medical examiner actually contradicts and doesn't agree and is at odds with the spirit and the language of the actual autopsy. That's the first problem. Here's the second problem. Let's highlight that. Now let's deal with the second problem. There is evidence, both physical evidence and in terms of witness statements, that seem to indicate that Kiely was severely intoxicated. Not like somewhat intoxicated, severely intoxicated. Enough for Sammy not to want to get a ride with her as arranged. Do you guys remember this? That's something else that I dealt with in a sort of a separate video. Remember that? So now we're going to deal with, besides the autopsy, in the fabric of this case, what do we know about the idea of intoxication, right? So let's deal with that. It's a matter of inference that Kiely took a wrong turn and then a second wrong turn and then drove into a reservoir and died, not because she was sober or slightly intoxicated, but because she was more than slightly intoxicated. Some have mentioned that Kiely was familiar with the area, but even someone with intimate knowledge of a route or road, driving drunk can go off the road. In addition, the physical evidence is clearly visible in AWP footage showing at least 1 can of alcohol, and it's likely that there were more, and that LE discovered this during an assessment of the contents of the vehicle. This part I think is really interesting. If they did discover additional cans of Truly, for example, if they did, it would be interesting that that is not disclosed in the contents of the report. I'm going to just put that up. it's also possible that it might be disclosed in the CHP report. What I'm trying to say is it's quite interesting that although they spoke about finding Kiely in the vehicle, they didn't really, and finding and described how they found in the vehicle. They didn't really describe too much the contents inside the vehicle besides saying they found a sneaker, right? Okay, so let's continue. So we know for a fact that alcohol was present. Do you guys agree with that point? So right on screen right now, you can see alcohol in your picture, right? A can of alcohol. It actually wasn't that brand. It was, I think, orange, the orange flavor, right? So do you guys agree that we know for a fact that alcohol was present based on that picture you see, right? So you take that and then you go to the next level and you say, besides knowing that for a fact, contextually, given that it was a seniors party, you would expect, and I've got that word here in all caps, big word, you would expect there to be alcohol present, wouldn't you? Also, unless you're a foul play person, then please don't answer that because you would not expect anything. But you would expect there to be alcohol present at a seniors party. Also, Sammy indicated the following. These are her words verbatim. This is an eyewitness account. She said, we were going around the party drinking the same drinks. And so Kiely and I were going around taking shots and just drinking. We were trading drinks with each other. We were sharing drinks with each other. We would go back to a car to get some alcohol. Now, if you just read that short statement, let's count the amount of times Sammy refers to drinking or alcohol. She says, drinking the same drinks, taking shots, and just drinking. We were trading drinks. We were sharing drinks. We would go back to a car and get some alcohol. That's 7 references in about 2 or 3 sentences. 7 references to drinking in 2 or 3 sentences. It feels like there was a lot of drinking going on, doesn't it? From that statement, right? From that statement. Does the word or just the idea of alcohol come up here? So once again, just thinking in a very simple way, does the idea of alcohol come up in the story when you sort of deal with the information? Does it come up a little or does it come up quite significantly? I'm guessing the host's medical examiner was too busy to investigate the statement from Sammy, or either didn't know about it. I don't know whether the host would have conveyed it to him. I don't know if they would have discussed it. They would know that. But since the host himself never really covered the Rodni case in as much detail as many other channels, one wonders whether that would have been brought up. So in my opinion, I think the medical examiner is incorrect to say the alcohol is probably all from decomposition. We're still at the second of the 3 arguments. How do you think I'm doing so far? How do you think I'm doing so far? So I'm challenging the notion that alcohol is probably all from decomposition. Right? Thanks, Alan. Okay. Deborah says, I remember reading that. Sammy's young and yet it feels like alcohol was a main feature here. Okay. So now we're going to go to the third and final sort of level of this argument. This it's a legal argument. It's a scientific opinion. Or let's put it this way. I'm arguing a scientific aspect to this case, right? Okay, so now let's deal with part 3. I said earlier that I do know a little bit about how blood alcohol content propagates, and that it does so based on quite a complicated but predictable calculus. It propagates at a rate that is well known, right? It's a rate that is familiar to in the scientific literature, and I'm sure that the medical examiner knows this as well. But the fact is, getting a blood alcohol content number from liver tissue in a drowning victim submerged for over 2 weeks isn't going to give you accurate numbers. And he may disagree with that. He may say, you know what? You can get very accurate blood alcohol from the liver. But what I'm saying is, yeah, but not from a drowning victim, not from someone in water, and not from someone in water for as long as this person was in water, right? That's the difference here. In other words, that blood alcohol content that is such a familiar calculus is a little bit of a different number and a different calculus when you're dealing with freshwater submersion, given and the length of time we're talking about here, which is exactly why we dealt with this, right? Do you see the words there? Low vitreous blood ethanol should not automatically be interpreted as evidence of postmortem ethanol formation in the blood. In other words, you should, how can I put it? You shouldn't confuse that with post-mortem ethanol formation. It could actually be the original levels, right? Okay. So as I dealt with in this analysis, the Kiely Rodni autopsy on September 3rd, just called The Unique Challenges of Water, I shared with you guys that there are other ways to get more accurate BAC numbers than from liver tissue. And we dealt with the vitreous humor and also urine in the bladder. So I'm surprised the medical examiner didn't mention this fact. I don't think one can make absolute statements about ethanol given this somewhat complex situation. It's not like extremely complicated, but it's also not extremely simple. The length of time in the water makes it somewhat, in terms of the toxicology, makes it somewhat complicated. And I think it requires deeper forensic examination than just looking at the documents and saying, oh, I think that. I mentioned earlier my friend Thomas Mollett is a forensic scientist. He did precisely that for me during the lead up to the sentencing in the Chris Watts case. In a way, in that case, I was second guessing the assessment of the Boulder DA, and I ended up, sorry, I shouldn't say I ended up, my expert ended up totally corroborating their findings, which was, in a way, a surprise. I actually thought, I wonder if she was drinking on the plane, right? And it turned out, wow, there's nothing to see here. She didn't drink alcohol. The numbers are exactly what you'd expect, right? So what Mollett showed me, Thomas Mollett, this forensic scientist, showed me is that there are at least two arms to determining blood alcohol content. One is the calculus of natural ethanol, how it propagates. The other are the circumstances and context surrounding a particular incident. Both provide clues to the likely end result. What I'm trying to say there is, I was obviously looking over his shoulder while he was trying to come up with this blood alcohol calculation. And what surprised me was there was a certain investigative element to that. He didn't just do the calculus. He also wanted to know the timeline in detail. He also wanted to know the circumstances in detail. And he also wanted to know Shanann's drinking habits in detail. And so I had to go like through all of Shanann's social media and try and find instances where she was drinking alcohol. And instances in the discovery where people were asked how much she drinks and how much alcohol was actually in the home and all that kind of thing. I was quite surprised, as part of studying that aspect, which is kind of autopsy related, the coroner can be quite investigative in a certain instance. You can really go into detail into a timeline. You can go quite detail into the circumstances of a case in order to come to a particular assessment, right? Obviously, when a coroner deals with a particular case, one of the big things he's got to deal with is the circumstances he's presented with when he gets the body. Where is it? When is it? How is it? Right? All of that is part of his job as well. And I was quite surprised. It's not just putting a sample in and running the numbers. There's also a investigative aspect as well. So even if the host medical examiner is right about the natural alcohol level, and I'm not sure he is, I doubt whether he's intimately familiar with what eyewitnesses said about Kiely at the party. I could be wrong, maybe he did know. But this is also the difference between TCRS, this channel, and almost every other channel that covered this case. I've always trusted Sammy on the important eyewitness stuff, which all the other channels have not, because they were told to be suspicious and they were incentivized to be suspicious. It seems logical to assume alcohol was present, and the fact that ethanol is positive shouldn't be quickly or easily dismissed, as many have. So do you remember that particular image? Can you guys see that? There you can see that truly again. Okay. This is from the autopsy. Over there. So you can see positive findings: ethanol, nicotine, caffeine, cotinine, and THC, right? So now I'm going to kind of take my argument in a way further. I've sort of addressed really all three levels, but I'm actually going to take it further, even though I don't really have to. These are what I call additional gripes. These are additional gripes. So I don't know if you caught that. I was basically just saying you can't say as an absolute statement that, and you might say probably isn't absolute, but it's more going one way than another to say it probably was due to decomposition. I'm saying it probably wasn't. And so you can't use the word probably. You can say it was possibly due to decomposition, but also it could be possibly partly due to that. The other thing that is, I think, really interesting, again, just in a very simplistic way to think about, is imagine you drink a cup of coffee. This is coffee. You eat a chocolate. You smoke a cigarette. You eat some space cake or whatever, right? And then the next moment you die and you are in water, and 2 weeks go by and they're still able to find traces of the coffee, the chocolate, the all of these substances in your body that have been to some extent absorbed by your body over that period, but also to some extent absorbed by the environment, but also to some extent diluted by the water that you've been in. And so the mere fact that you took a sip of coffee and someone took a piece of your liver and they were able to find evidence of caffeine, that's pretty incredible. That must have meant your coffee was quite strong, or it means that your instruments measuring this are pretty accurate, or both, right? I'm just saying it's not guaranteed that even if I did drink coffee that it would come up, because of the erosion of evidence that takes place where chemicals dissipate over time. Some of them dissolve, some of them simply fritter away due to decomposition processes and so on, right? I just think it's quite amazing that she was in the water for 16 days and they still found these traces, including caffeine. One wonders whether she was drinking something like a Red Bull. I don't know if there's caffeine. Is there caffeine in Truly? Let me just check that quickly. Oh, it does. It does have caffeine. That's interesting. So there it says 9 milligrams. Truly iced tea is made with real brewed tea that contains a small amount of naturally occurring caffeine. Truly iced tea contains 9 milligrams of caffeine. ... Let's see if I can bring up a can. Yeah, so that can that you see there, can you see it over there, is I think one of these. I think it's actually the orange flavor. Don't actually see it here, but it does have caffeine in it, which is definitely quite interesting. Did she get the caffeine through coffee or did she get it through this? Okay. So in terms of additional gripes, once again, just as I mentioned in the first critique of the former Ali's assessment, there's absolutely no attempt to acknowledge the potential polypharmacy effect of drinking and drug use. I just find that a little kind of, is the word clumsy or incomplete, or I don't know, not quite sure what the word is. But even the medical expert, even the medical examiner, no attempt to actually say that could have an impact on intoxication level, on the, you know, the whole thing, this particular thing. The fact that you potentially have alcohol and these substances, what polypharmaceutical potential impact could a combination of those substances have? I think it's quite an interesting question. So yeah, well, so you're not going to talk about the polypharmacy, you're not going to talk about the idea of drinking shots or drinking this particular alcoholic drink and what the potential impact could be of that particular drink with marijuana. In a very basic sense, drinking alcohol before using weed can lead to ordinary dizziness and can lead to a stronger high. According to the literature, consuming weed before drinking appears to be a lot worse than the other way around, right? So this is something I want to share with you guys. I think it's from a website called Healthline. It's to do with alcohol and weed. So I just want to share that with you guys. We kind of dealt with this in the death of Elvis Presley, all these polypharmaceutical potential effects, which is quite interesting. Using weed before drinking alcohol may minimize the effects of alcohol. Now think about what that means. It may minimize the effect of the alcohol, but what it should say there is minimize the perceived effect. This means you might be tipsier than you feel. In other words, it means you may be drunker than you think you are because the weed is interfering with your perception of your own tipsiness. You may also think that the weed is the measure of how intoxicated you are and the full and final measure of that, and that's interfering with an underlying tipsiness from the alcohol. it goes on to say, this means you may be tipsier than you feel, which increases your risk of becoming overly intoxicated. Think about that with a young person. There's a kind of a distorted sense of how drunk you are because of this polypharmaceutical impact. In other words, because you don't know how drunk you are, you end up getting a lot drunker than you meant to get. And isn't that exactly what happened? Isn't that exactly what happened? Also, drinking and using marijuana produces greater impairment than only drinking. So that's another thing that I think is a little bit defective in the autopsy. So if you're going to say accident, it's actually quite interesting that the autopsy doesn't prognosticate over that she was driving under the influence. It doesn't really go there. It simply shows you the information and says drowning and accident. It doesn't really address was she intoxicated. And maybe you could say that is left out for privacy purposes because she was a minor. Maybe that was left out or not included because that would then create a witch hunt all over again. Oh, she was intoxicated, who's to blame? So I think it's important to stress that drinking and using marijuana together produces greater impairment than only drinking. So I think it's possible, this is my assessment, that Kiely drank and got high. And this is a major difference, I think, between all of the autopsy analysis I've seen. I haven't seen people say that. And, you know, if you say, I don't think that's what the autopsy says, I do. Based on the autopsy, which I don't think is as accurate as it could have been using vitreous humor, for example, but it's also not as though it's completely absent. That's my interpretation of it. And I'm not saying it's absolute proof of that. I'm saying it's possible proof of that. I'm not even saying it's probable proof. I'm saying it's possible. And it supports my opinion, that's all. So at one point, the host in this particular assessment of the autopsy was asked, why was Kiely unable to escape the vehicle? And I think a fairly lengthy period was offered as the length of time that it may have taken for her to escape, or the length of time that escape was possible. Why couldn't she escape the vehicle? The host, I believe, said, and I could be wrong, if I've got this wrong, you're welcome to correct me. I think he said, I have no idea. We said, he didn't know. Well, one simple explanation for why she couldn't escape is she wasn't sober. Is she was not mildly intoxicated, but significantly intoxicated. In other words, she was not too intoxicated to be able to drive at all, but she was significantly intoxicated that she would take a wrong turn. And then take that level of intoxication. How good are you at navigating, escaping a vehicle? Well, not as good as a sober person. Wouldn't this make it difficult to coordinate an escape with the clock ticking in an unstable vehicle, filling up with water, and then later tipping over? Again, all I'm doing is I'm offering a rational explanation. I'm not saying I don't know. I'm not saying I'm going to wait till the CHP report. And I'm not saying I'm really, really clever and I know it all. I'm saying we do have enough information, I feel, to make an assessment based on the information. And I think it's quite a rational assessment. You guys agree? Beverly says, Pastor joined at Stone's concert. Guy passed out. Just looking at some of your comments. I hope you guys are all talking nicely with one another. I hope you guys are listening to what I'm saying. Okay, so let's continue. I don't have too much further to go, almost at the end. So finally, I think it's necessary to point out the title video on the former Ali channel. So this is something that kind of bugged me, is that right now, the title video, or certainly when I last looked, the title video, in other words, if you go to the channel's page, the title video is still the AWP interview video, and it's got like over 100,000 views, right? So at the same time that you are talking about an autopsy and you have got an expert on that saying it's an accident, you've actually got the originators of that story as the title video on your channel. And I said earlier, does some of this feel a little bit disingenuous, right? Maybe it isn't. Maybe you can say, I'm not trying to say anything. I'm just leaving it for you to make up your own mind or something like that. You could say, I'm not here to explain to you true crime cases. All I'm here to do is read you the information and you can make up your own mind. But then you kind of get the idea, but isn't this about your expertise and that you have so many years in law enforcement? So it is about you, an influential person who knows what you're talking about. If that's true, then why would you have on your channel the originator of the foul play theory, while at the same time saying my expert accepts that it's an accident or that it's drowning, that she died by drowning? Actually, I can't say for sure whether he believes it is an accident. So I guess you could say until he decides for sure that it's an accident, when the CHP report comes out, then it still is maybe foul play. So my video should be there because actually that is what I think. I suppose you could draw that inference. I don't know. I don't know what you guys think. Okay. The problem is that the assessment of the autopsy and the AWP interview are, in my opinion, basically mutually destructive. The host made no attempt to interrogate the suspicious foul play narrative when he spoke to the three main members. I think it was the only channel that had the three main members on his channel in September. Instead, there was a lot of mutual endorsement. In fact, during his interview, which was quoted by The Sun, the host told AWP that there was nothing wrong with them sharing their opinion, even after they'd said that they'd tried to control the narrative. There's nothing wrong with us. I'm a former tow truck driver or something, and I'm allowed to control a narrative about an investigation. I'm allowed to do that. And you had a former Ali, so not really questioning that. And look where we are right now. So my question is, well, wasn't there something wrong with that? Because after the autopsies come out, they've actually posted on their social media saying, we'll accept that. In other words, it seems to be, I don't know, maybe they could maybe disagree and say, no, we don't accept that. My question is, wasn't there something wrong with the original assertion right as the diver came out the water? Wasn't there something wrong with that? Doesn't the autopsy show something was wrong with that original opinion? Why isn't anyone saying that? You don't hear that. It's simply not addressed, which I find interesting. As I say, what I also find interesting is I've got to go onto YouTube and refer to another YouTube channel. And by the way, the reason I don't identify them or refer to them by name isn't to protect them, it's to protect me from them. It's not to protect them, it's to protect me from them. I've got to go onto YouTube and address their addressing, which I don't believe is done right or properly, and in a way direct you back to their channels to go and have a look at that, right? And I've done that with quite a few channels. I'm not afraid to mention Gray Hughes Investigates because I think he's a good guy and he's done some good work. But I'm definitely a channel that has redirected you guys to a lot of other channels that have been covering this case. And I'm kind of not afraid to do that, to look at the whole coverage and say whatever I've got to say. What I find really interesting is you never really see something like, wow, you know, in the true crime space, there was actually a channel that has been saying over and over again and quite early on that this looks like an accident. So we're not going to credit that channel. So in this analysis, I've credited the channel I'm talking about with quite a good assessment of the autopsy, but I've also critically dealt with one aspect that I don't agree with, but I'm nevertheless acknowledging his work. What I find really interesting is there's no credit my way. In fact, what I get instead is either when I'm mentioned, I'm discredited. I'm not credited, I'm discredited. And what I'm also finding is that, or I'm just not mentioned at all. Let's not tell our subscribers at all. Let's not mention him at all. Let's pretend that he doesn't actually exist. I know that you exist, and I know that you and you and you exist. Don't you know that I exist? And is your strategy, let's pretend that you do not exist, like Vincent van Gogh? Because that worked with Vincent van Gogh. He died a pauper, and he didn't get any recognition. And then a long time later, he did get some recognition. I would really hate for that to happen to me. Like Van Gogh, I think I've worked pretty hard. Like Van Gogh, I think I worked really hard, and I didn't really get much credit. Right? And so I kind of just want to ask, isn't it a little disingenuous? We're all nice people doing a good job, earning an honest living. Isn't that a little bit disingenuous? Or is the genuine thing, we think you're an arsehole? That's different though. Then it's just, well, we don't like you. That's why we don't really ever mention you. If that's the case, well, then that's the case. I could also make that argument. I could also argue who I like and who I don't like, but I actually argue the merits like a professional. I argue the legal argument in terms of the truth and the facts, right? I don't say, I don't like you and so blah, 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 and so I won't mention you and so blah, 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 blah. I argue the case. I argue the facts. And isn't that being authentic in the true crime space? Yeah, that's how I feel. That's definitely how I feel. It's so weird. It's like we're in true crime, but you can't handle the truth. We're in true crime, but we can't handle the truth. I think, where the world is right now. So I also said in the previous video, I said we would cover 7 signs you're in denial, right, in the previous analysis. But since I didn't get to that, I'm going to deal with that here. And you can look at that on this page. Do you guys want me to put a link to it in chat? What I want to put on your radar, guys listening, guys in chat, and if the creators watching, this is not to say, are you in denial? This is actually to say, am I in denial? This is actually to say, are we in denial? It's not trying to accuse you and point fingers at you. And I also want those in chat not to take that approach. The idea is to look at this information and say, wow, what does it say about me? Also, what does it say about us, right? So let's have a look. 7 signs that you might be in denial. You might be in denial if you think you have all the information you need. That's the first one. And do you know, that's why we keep saying on this channel, the Scout mindset, stay curious, keep investigating, also keep an open mind. If you think you've got all the information you need, you might be in denial. Okay. You might be in denial if you don't make a point to listen. You might be in denial if you think short term, if you're trying to get rich quick, if you're not thinking about the overall arc of this case and also of this community and how the pendulum swings. You might be in denial if you talk trash about competitors and individuals. There definitely are some who specialize in that. You might be in denial if you relabel actions rather than changing them. I think that's number 1, 2, 3, 4. Have I got all of them? Yeah. Yeah, this is a really good one. You might be in denial if you don't tell the truth. I think that's quite a, what's the word? It's a problem to not be in denial if you're not telling the truth. You might be in denial if you don't tell the truth. So if you are in denial, it might be a sign that you're not telling the truth. Someone asked me to explain how I got the name The Most Authentic Voice in True Crime. So what happened was I was an author before I made YouTube videos. And I think I was writing a book with an American co-author, and we were reviewed by someone who said, I think it was a Jodi Arias book, and she said, you are the most authentic voice in true crime, meaning in terms of your writing, in terms of your approach, in terms of your sort of genuine, the way you handle these cases. It was actually a symbolic compliment based on our work, on our writing. And that always stuck with me because we'd been speaking about authenticity a lot. In fact, one of the books we wrote is called Authenticity, one of the Jodi Arias books. And when someone actually started stealing my blog content and reading it on YouTube, and I had actually decided I'm not going to go onto YouTube. I didn't want to go onto YouTube. I also felt it's going to actually hurt my book sales. People are going to say, you're not even American. You don't sound American. So I'm actually really disappointed. And so I'm not even going to buy your books. And I actually thought I'm not going to go on YouTube when everyone else was sort of going onto YouTube. But then someone started stealing my blog post that she would just read it out and butcher it. And then I thought, well, why don't I just do that? Why don't I just read my own blogs and try and market my books? And then I thought, yeah, but what about my voice? And I was quite embarrassed about my voice. I thought I've got a very, and you guys will like this, I've got a very nasal, dull, irritating voice and not an American accent. And then I thought, how about aspiring to be the most authentic voice in true crime in a symbolic way? And I liked the sound of that. I didn't really expect people to go, wow, you arrogant schmuck. I kind of thought they'd go, wow, his voice is quite different. Let's hear what he's got to say. But I actually think it's fine. I think if you jump to a conclusion very quickly and you say, I don't like you, and I don't like the sound of you, so I'm out of here. I think that's the kind of person I don't want on my channel. I think someone who's willing to give me a chance and get to know my arguments, that's someone I do want on my channel. And so that's really how it came about. So I didn't really come up with that, but I like the sound of it. And I do agree that it doesn't really mean anything. And it is quite laughable today because it's a totally inauthentic landscape. And I think if you're making jokes about trying to be authentic, if you're making jokes about, you call yourself the most authentic, what a joke. You think so much of yourself. It's like, so trying to tell the truth in a channel that's about truth and facts and justice is a joke. Yeah, it is a joke. It doesn't mean anything. Your credibility doesn't mean anything. I get that. That's why I'd say I think should change that to the most Van Gogh voice in true crime. All right? So that's the story of where that comes about. Hope that helps. I didn't come up with it. A reader came up with it, and I quite liked it. And I think it's a goal worth aspiring to, authenticity in this genre. Okay, you might be in denial if you don't tell the truth. You might be in denial if you don't think denial is a problem you face. That's quite an interesting one. Let me bring that up. I thought there were 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Has that been 7? So anyway, there it is. Do you think the true crime community are in denial? Do you think this case has shown the true crime community is in denial? So let's check what you think about that. Do you think answer yes if you agree and no if you don't agree? Let's see what you guys say.
You've always had.
What do you guys say? Anyone say no? Zoe says yes, 10,000%. I don't see anyone. Oh, Jane Belinda says no. Jane says we're not in denial. Jane denies that they're in denial. I think that's quite interesting. I deny that we're in denial. Anyway, quite interesting. Okay, so let's have a look at the poll. Make sure you vote. If you haven't voted, 2 former Ali investigators separately assessed the Kiely Rodni autopsy. Which do you agree with? A quarter of you, 24%, say last night's assessment. only 10% say the first assessment, which is quite low. And then an astonishing 2/3 say, I have no idea. So I think the basic thing to draw, tell me if you agree with this, the basic thing to draw about Ali assessment number 1 and Ali assessment number 2 was Ali assessment number 1 undermined the autopsy and basically criticized it. And I don't know if that was valid. I don't really believe it's really valid. And the second one validated it and basically accepted it, said that she did die of drowning, right? That is the title of this thing, of this video, right? The circumstances certainly would support a conclusion of drowning. I've learned a lot. That's quite a cool avatar. It says, I think it's opening some eyes, but people are still milking this case for clicks and views and lots of money. Okay. Well, I think that is it for me. I'm gonna do this experiment one more time. I don't know if it's really necessary, but just to show how, to me, ridiculously simple the autopsy should be. In theory, here is a container with water in it. Here is a vehicle with somebody inside it. The vehicle goes into the water, and it's in the water for a really long time. And the occupant in the water can't get out the vehicle and dies inside the vehicle. What happened to the occupant? Someone went into water, couldn't get out the water, and was in the water for a really long time. What happened to that person? Okay. So some deny less than others. How can you be one of them? How can you be someone who is less in denial? Answer, learn to think critically, not only about situations and other people, but yourself. If you can think critically about yourself, you can be less in denial. It's one step coming out of denial and becoming more in touch with the real world. I also want to, as a final thing, I want to deal with the author of the autopsy's credentials. Let's see if I can find that. It's not there. I'll be with you in a second. Is that it? Yes, there it is. Okay, so I want to sign off here by looking at the credentials of Gregory D. Reiber, medical doctor. He was the forensic pathologist, right? He said cause of death, drowning. Okay, so, and this information is courtesy of someone on Patreon. So thanks a lot, Les. Les wrote the following. I think it's helpful to look at Dr. Gregory Reiber's qualifications. Yes, indeed. He graduated from Loma Linda University, California Medical School in 1981, and from the period 1990 to 2014, right? 24 years, was one of the forensic pathologists who conducted autopsies for homicides, deaths occurring in Sacramento County. So this is actually a pathologist specializing in homicides, right? He has testified in many murder trials in Sacramento County. Per LinkedIn, this is according to Les, he moved to doing autopsies for neighboring Placer County in 2014. So he's been in Placer County for 8 years, right? So he is vastly experienced. He began his residency in pathology all the way back in 1981. He has a Bachelor of Science, magna cum laude, from Andrews University, Michigan. Per LinkedIn, he did autopsies for San Bernardino County, California for 5 years before coming to Sacramento County. According to vitals.com, he has specialty expertise in blood testing, fluid testing, and tissue biopsy. To be honest, this is according to Les, Dr. Reiber is likely one of the most qualified forensic pathologists in America to have conducted the Rodni autopsy. And then he says, I've got a high level of confidence in his report. So you do actually have a very qualified and capable doctor performing this. And yet you've got Ali, certainly one side of Ali, saying, can we get a second opinion? That's quite a qualified guy that was involved in this. And I would imagine that other doctors would know that. Other doctors would be aware of his reputation. Deborah says, I'm 60 and I'll never stop learning. Okay, so that is it from my side. Are there any super chats? I don't actually think there have been any super chats. So that again just confirms I'm the Van Gogh of true crime, right? Don't give me a super chat because you'll ruin that now. Because I quite like that idea of you are ahead of your time, and you also misunderstood, and whatever, all of that stuff. Anyway, I hope you found that this. Kelly McLean says, I don't think that she drowned. Okay. Corina says, I'm okay with that pathologist. That's it. That's it. But it's partly because of this situation. 250 people in chat. What you've said here, you might say it's true. Well, does it matter? Does it matter if you get 250 people in chat and you've worked really hard in terms of your research and everything, but you're not acknowledged by your peers and not acknowledged by the community? Well, then should you really continue banging your head against a wall? And I'm sure my co-creators will love to hear that. You shouldn't. Stop. Yeah, okay, I will. I am going to be kind of withdrawing from the YouTube space. I definitely am going to be withdrawing from the YouTube space because I'm working quite hard for quite a lot less. I'm trying to tell the truth. It seems not to matter. And that's not really a space I want to be in. I don't want to be in a space that says truth doesn't matter. Accountability doesn't matter. In true crime, accountability doesn't matter either. Justice, we all here trying to find justice, except when we mess up, then we don't need to apologize. Where's that thing from the Financial Times? We don't need to do that. We don't need to apologize for the chaos. Anyway, suddenly there's been a rush of super stickers. Thank you to Pooh's Blustery Day. Thanks for that. And E. Caroline and Sharon. I must say you shouldn't have. Like, I sort of actually feel bad about it. I don't like mentioning it and then you feel bad, but it's just really what it is. There have been channels that have really spoken nonsense for hours upon hours, and they've really benefited from that. And that's, what can you do in a situation like that? What can you do? And I think the answer is you've got to separate yourself from that community, because if that's not a valid community and you're all about authenticity, then you must go and be authentic somewhere else, right? If your work also isn't esteemed by other people, you should get out. Right? So I have actually prepared a sort of a statement dealing with that, but I'll deal with that later on. It's already an hour and 49 minutes. Anyway, I want to thank my mods that are here. I want to thank the members that are here. Nisi, good to see you here. And I'm not sure if they're new subscribers. Probably not. You'll see that my subscriber numbers have really just stayed stuck because I'm not an authentic voice in true crime. I'm not really worth listening to. Like in terms of the Kiely Rodni case, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So hence that's the situation. So yeah, let's just have a look at the poll. Where's the poll right now?
Do you want to grow?
Last night's assessment, 25%, while 65% say I have no idea. 65%, 2/3 don't know what to make of the autopsy. Can I ask you guys this question? And it's really my community. Do you guys feel you have a clear understanding of the autopsy now? Like, do you guys feel that you have quite a strong sense of confidence of the autopsy now? How the autopsy actually links into the accident narrative and also how the toxicology does. Is it quite clear to you? What do you guys say? Wow, electronic medium. That's pretty amazing. Thanks so much. Wow, really, really humbled and really grateful. Thanks so much. I'm really, wow, I'm at a loss for words. Thank you. Thank you. Angela says, Nick, you're truly needed in the true crime community. There aren't many out there that do true crime justice. Thanks, Angela. Appreciate that. Okay. So Paddy Dunn, keep on keeping on. Yeah, hashtag Team Peachtree. And I really think we need to have merged with that. You can probably have quite a lot of fun with that. Bria says this isn't even a true crime case. Too bad fake crime is more sensational than true crime. So Koikat says don't do that. So a lot of you have said yes. Much better, thank you. That sounds good. And thanks for that, Deborah. Yes. Good. Bria says, wow, I would like to thank every one of you who donated tonight. It's so kind of all of you, definitely. And Run the World says, I believe what you say because you sound the most rational to me. I love that. I love that comment. I hope it is rational because I think it is rational. Thanks for that. Thanks, Nisi. I feel like I'm in is it a Revlon ad? Because you're worth it. Yeah, that's a Team Peachtree. Soldier on. No, not Soldier on, Scout on, right? Cool. Amy Carter, stay here, please. Yeah, well, I'm not going to be like leaving forever. I'm just planning to diminish. That's all. Rational, authentic, and just. Cool. What is electronic medium says stay on 5 more minutes. Marlene Stewart says explain Team Peachtree. Okay. I'm going to do this for 5 minutes. Okay, then I'm going to get going. So Team Peachtree is, I was actually not in a very happy place for not even regarding this case, before this case. And during the Van Gogh letters episodes, I think this was behind a paywall, so that's maybe why you don't know. It was in the membership area. I spoke to the Van Gogh letters folks, and I said that right now there's a peach tree that I planted at the end of the summer, but quite close to a wall in a new patio area. And since the time I planted it, it hasn't been in any sunlight. And it's a plant that a peach tree needs full sun. And so since the time I planted it, throughout the entire winter, and obviously it loses leaves in the winter, it hadn't had any sunlight on it. It was in the shade for the entire winter. And I was worried about that. And so I started watching the other trees. This is when springtime came along. I started watching the other trees. And this peach tree that had been in the shade all this time nevertheless blossomed like the peach tree next to it. But it was still kind of smaller, and it was stuck in the shade. And I was just hoping that it would keep growing, because it just had to get past a wall, so it had to go about 3 feet, 2 or 3 feet, and then it would get its uppermost leaves. It's a baby tree, a sapling. It would get its uppermost leaves beyond the top of the wall, and then it would be in the light, and then it could grow and flourish. And so I was just hoping it would just grow, hoping, but not necessarily knowing that the light was on its way. The other thing that was taking place is the sun moving over the equator in terms of the angle of the earth, when the seasons change. That was bringing more and more sunlight into that courtyard area. The thing was this tree going to make it through days and days of shade all day, days turning into weeks? This is when summer is at hand. And then ultimately it did reach for its leaf tips, made it into the sunlight. And right now it is getting, I guess, full sun for half a day. And the sun in Africa, especially when we have heat waves, can be merciless. So it may be being half the day in the shade may actually be quite good for it. But the whole Team Peachtree idea is this idea of being in the shade, and it's unfair, and you must nevertheless persevere towards the light. That's where that idea came from. And I must say that tree has probably grown easily 2 feet in probably the last month. 2 feet. That's like that much. That's a lot. That's a lot to grow in 1 month. The tree next to it, that's been in a lot more sun, has actually grown even more, about 3 feet. So that's where the Team Peachtree thing comes from. It's basically to be able to have an identity and to know where your roots are, and to know what your truth is, even though you're not actually in the light, and to reach for it anyway. Even though you're not being nourished, even though you're not getting the support that you need, I guess, you nevertheless persevere. So that's where that thought and that idea comes from. It's quite a nice thought, wouldn't you say? That's what we thought, yeah. So I'm hoping next spring that tree is going to produce peaches. The other tree did produce peaches, and they are continuing to get bigger and juicier, and they're supposed to be like a golden color, golden peaches. So hopefully I can show you one when it comes to that point. They are both very young trees, so they may need a little bit of time to produce great fruit. So, but that's where that story comes from. And by the way, the trees I'm talking about, if you sat where I am, it's right out the window and down. So it's right there, sorry, there from where I'm sitting right now, just outside the window and downstairs. Okay, so we had about 2 hours. I'm not going to take it further than that. Terry, thank you so much. Terry, we really appreciate your work in this case. You really personalized it and brought it home in a much more intimate way than we otherwise would. And it's something we want to do more often, is have TCRS investigators going out into the field. I want to be one of them as well. So we'll see. Bria says it is the best channel. Nisi says, I know of no other channel close to TCRS. Cool. Nick, will you do a short video and show us the tree? I think I've actually got it on Instagram. I can maybe bring that up really quickly. If it's going to let me. Instagram. But this is some time ago when it was a lot smaller. Yeah, sorry, I can't bring it up, but you can go to my Instagram. Maybe, can I bring it up? No, I can't bring it up. If you go into my Instagram, you scroll down, you'll find it over there. So check that out. Cool. Well, now I've got to thank you all for the super chats. I'm really humbled and I'm really grateful. Thanks a lot to you guys. Also, this is a really, I thought, a very nice group of you in this particular assessment. Yesterday, there's a lot of really nastiness. It really also makes us feel like, I almost put this in a members-only chat because there's so much nastiness. Anyway, I'm sure that'll, well, I hope that is gonna change. No, I'm not in Johannesburg. I've learned a lot since I will go to Instagram. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys, for joining me. Mods, thanks so much for being here. Subs, take care. Super chats, thank you. Appreciate you. Keep it authentic, keep it real, and I'll see you guys next time.